housed downtown. So we have community meeting space, educational programs that enhance public appreciation for architecture and design. We also house AIA Miami, as well as the Downtown Miami Welcome Center in partnership with the Miami Downtown Development Authority. And our Welcome Center is everything Miami: cultural events, attractions, maps, history, and more. So I want to welcome everybody. There's a lot going on despite the current situation. So I'm really excited to kind of give a recap of some of our upcoming events. So February 10th at 6 p.m. we have a book launch, Radical Architecture of the Future, with author Beatrice Galilee, co-sponsored by the AIA New York and AIA Miami and MCAD. On February 25th at 6 p.m. we have another book talk with Dan Barash, Ruin and Redemption in Architecture, an exploration of large-scale abandoned factories, sites, and theaters, and how they are being transformed and repurposed. And there's even a little bit about the Miami Marine Stadium. March 2nd at noon, Architecture and Fun, exploring the art of creating entertainment spaces. So panelists include Court Sin, who worked on the design team for Universal Studios' Harry Potter World. So that should be pretty interesting. And March 11th at 6 p.m. in partnership with the Copper Bridge Foundation, a film and discussion about Art Deco Rayo Platanes in Argentina and Uruguay. So I would also like to announce that we are actively building a young urbanist membership group within MCAD. So for those of you that consider yourselves to be young urbanists, please reach out to us. And then we have our Urban Warrior Award nominations are due tomorrow at 5. So if you're not sure about what any of that is, please go to our website and you can get all the amazing information about that event, which will take place on May 20th. So that's our Urban Warrior event on May 20th. Lots of exciting stuff. And now, let's get on with our program. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to you one of my most favorite people ever, Cheryl Jacobs, who is our fearless leader for both the Miami Center for Architecture and Design and for AIA Miami. And she's been a dear friend of mine for years. So without further ado, Cheryl Jacobs.
Thanks, Jason. That was sweet. Hi, everybody. So I'm excited about this program. We have 3 very wonderful panelists, and let me introduce them. Doing this alphabetically, so in no other reason for this order, alphabetically by last name. So don't think I'm dissing you, Erwin. But Brett Andersen. Brett is designing lighting projects, has been designing for more than 20 years. And he's a partner and principal designer at Focus Lighting in New York. Brett's collaborated with world-renowned design professionals on projects such as the lighting of the Bank of America Corporate Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, Atmosphere Restaurant on the 122nd floor of, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, in Dubai. And one of projects that's near and dear to my heart, because I'm on the Art and Public Places Trust, is the Royal Caribbean Cruise Ship Terminal here in Miami on Dodge Island. So welcome, Brett.
Thank you.
Our next is Ken Douglas, or Kenneth.
Ken's fine.
Ken is good? Okay. Ken is a principal at HLB Lighting Design and with over 30 years experience. And he originally trained in theatrical lighting, and which gave him kind of a natural ability to understand and realize complex mechanical and technical details. He brings a unique viewpoint to his designs. And he's done projects all over the world. We'll see some of them in just a few minutes. And then I'm also so happy to bring to you Irwin Reddle. I first learned about Erwin because of the work that he did for us here in Miami in the cruise terminal, and then became aware of his amazing work around the world. He's from Austria, and he came to the U.S. With a Fulbright scholarship in 1993. He lives in Bowling Green, Ohio, and New York, which is, it's a kind of an interesting combo, Erwin. His work is informed by a combination of conceptual structural thinking and profound craftsmanship, both in electronic and traditional media. So with that, let's get on with the discussion. One of the questions that I didn't have that I sent you guys ahead of time that I'm going to throw at you, but I think you can answer it. Very quick, what is it that you would want everyone that's listening today, what is the most important thing you'd want people to know about you? I'm going to start with you, Erwin.
I'm interested in ephemeral media, so which is, light is ephemeral. It's not a physical object, actually it's little particles of light, but let's just drop that discussion. So I'm interested in structures, and to express abstract structures. Light is a wonderful medium. I also have a music background, so for me it's about structure, and light is my medium to express it most of the time.
That's great. And what about you, Ken?
A lot of what I try to do is to be a reflection of the communities that we work in. And so—
No pun intended?
No pun intended, no. And so I think from my perspective, if we've succeeded, you don't even recognize that we've been there, that we come in and we hopefully put something into your community that becomes a source of pride and a reflection of the people who live there, and that the folks who live there own it. And so if I'm anonymous, that's actually one of the best results.
That's great and very interesting. Brett?
I think one of the things that we're often trying to do on our projects is create kind of a memorable experience for people who experience our designs. And whether that's in an environment like a restaurant or a hotel, or whether it's driving by a big exterior project like the Royal Caribbean Terminal. So I think that's, it's not just the lighting, it's actually how the whole design comes together, and can we work with the whole team to make something that is a wonderful experience and something people take away after that and really remember it.
So thanks, Brett. So we're going to do this like a conversation, and if I ask one of you a question and one of the other ones of you have a comment to that, feel free to break in. And then also, as the discussion evolves, I know that you all have some images to share with us, and then just we'll let you share your screen at that time. So I'm going to start with Ken. And my first question to you is, how does lighting create an experience?
So it plays to our emotions. And there's a couple of different ways to think about that question. Because we work on architecture, that sort of becomes our visual canvas. And it becomes, at least in the work I do, a collaboration between ourselves and the architect and the engineers involved on that job. And we want to make sure that we're reflecting both the goals of the owner, who is building the structure for whatever reason that structure is being constructed, the goals of the architect who's expressing his vision, and then, like I said earlier, how does it fit into the context of that community? And then what elements, that starts to drive what elements we pull out of the architecture at night. Doesn't have to be color. It could very, very beautifully be white light. And so how do we pull those lines out? Do we work with them to develop areas in the building that are especially receptive to being lit at night? And then how do what's the place of that structure in its nighttime context? What's happening with the adjacent structures if we're in an urban environment? So that everything sort of speaks to each other as part of a larger composition. So it's a collaborative nature, and then in the end, hopefully, when you're viewing it as the public, you're getting an emotional response from it, and everybody's emotional response will be different.
Absolutely. So Brett, playing into that a little bit, why are we lighting these big structures? Other than just enough lighting so you don't trip.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really important question that we've got to ask ourselves as lighting designers. And it, you know, to Ken's point, it kind of starts with an analysis of, you know, we all work for our clients. And so what are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? And once we understand that, then we can start analyzing the project and, you know, is it worth lighting up the building to achieve those goals? Is it worth it for the people who are going to experience the space? Is it worth it for the citizens and the visitors of a particular city that it makes sense that we do that? And you know, at least from a lighting perspective, in some ways, you know, we're the doctor, and our clients are the patient, and they come to us because of our experience and because of our expertise. And we kind of need to analyze all of those points to try to guide them to the right decision. Now, ultimately, they're responsible for which direction they want to head, but we have an obligation as a designer and as a design team to sort of move them in a direction that is the right thing, both for them and for the community at large.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, we're often educators. Often we'll come into a meeting or to a community setting where people have poor understandings of what light does, and they'll be afraid of too much, or they'll want too much for their context. And you spend some time teaching them enough that they can understand where you want to appropriately lead them in where they're going.
Yeah, I had an experience with a community meeting where people had no context of light design or light art. And I was invited to do a big project in South Carolina. And they basically had like, are you doing Christmas trees? Are you lighting our Christmas trees? That was their first response. And then I showed them different works what I do and other people do. And then they get a context. But it's really, there's a first hurdle, but just simply a lack of knowledge, basically. Mm-hmm. And you have to lead people into what's possible.
And we kind of have a saying in our office that seeing is believing. So what's kind of central to a lot of our work is actually, you know, we certainly show them images and research of other projects, but we get the best results and the best education of our clients when we actually do a large scale mock-up. And, you know, even for large exterior buildings, we've been known to pull out, you know, dozens of light fixtures to light up a portion of a building. It's not really until they see it with their own eyes that they really get it. A rendering can do only so much.
It's also technically very difficult to photograph light, as we all know, a video, especially, you know, documented on video. So it's my same approach, because most of my work comes through competitions. I spend all the money of a competition and more, and way beyond more, on building prototypes and actually bringing either a prototype in full scale or, you know, at a smaller scale to the presentation, because otherwise no computer rendering can transmit that message.
That's very true. So let me ask you, we were talking about context before. So as you know, context is so important in developing the architecture of a project and designing, as well as the lighting. So how early do you get involved, or how early would you like to get involved with lighting design and creating the, you know, understanding the context? I would start. Erwin, you want to start with that?
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about maybe the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line Terminal in Miami. And I have to mention as a disclaimer that Brett and his company, Focus Lighting, and I collaborated on this project. So Brett and his company did the interior and exterior architectural lighting, and I did the big interior light installation. And I was tagged on basically very, very late. The project was already in progression, and it caused, you know, enormous problems. Let's just say it is at the end, because it was just very an extremely tight schedule. And so it's the earlier the better, but sometimes it's also, it really depends on the conditions with the client. And in my case, it can be a private collector, it can be a museum, or it can be a public art project. It really depends. Sometimes I come in at the very end and it becomes one of the easiest project ever. And sometimes I come in very early and it's really difficult. So it's of course, earlier is better in general, but it doesn't mean it's always easy that way. Because sometimes it's even good to have very limited options, because you have too many options. Like if they bring you in the first design meeting before the building is even like up there, it's like you have too many options, and then it's actually restraint that actually helps to get creative, I think.
What I've found is if I can get in early enough that even if I can just be a fly on the wall for the early conceptual discussions, we can often see things that might be problems down the road, or maybe missed opportunities that can really help the design team kind of hone their concept and their approach. You know, I have a similar background to Ken. I came from a theatrical design background. And, you know, I find myself on a lot of design teams kind of having a bigger point of view about the lighting and about the experience of a space, whether it's a restaurant, a hotel, or a big exterior design, and trying to sort of hone the team's concept and the approach. Because what I find is that if we can get a design team where the architect, the interior designer, the owner, and the lighting designer, and everyone else are all heading towards one conceptual goal, if we can say those words out loud and all believe them, then we have a much greater chance of coming up with a memorable, impactful experience for people who experience the projects. If the architect's heading one way and the owner's heading a different, and I'm as a lighting designer is going the other opposite direction, it's possible, but it's a whole lot harder to get something that's successful.
You get a better project when there's more early collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also the earlier the better for a new building, obviously, and that has to do with not just light, but material selections and architectural detail development, because we'll often have contributions to all those things. If somebody may be selecting material that won't light well, and if we can intercept that before it gets too far down, everything will be more successful.
Yeah.
You know, I want to, before we go too much farther, I want to give you an opportunity to, you know, talk a little bit about some of your work and to show some of these amazing projects. So why don't we start? I'm going to start with you, Ken, if you want to share your screen.
Sure.
And, you know, you can talk about some of these amazing bridges that you guys have been working on.
So, can you see that now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm going to follow up on the context conversation then, and start, actually, it's sort of in the middle. So a lot of the context conversations we have to do with urban and rural environments and what's appropriate for each, and how does a certain city want to interact with the structure and have it communicate for them. So this is Lowry Avenue Bridge in Minneapolis. It's a basket-handled arch bridge, which changes color and is highly programmed. The community here really takes advantage of the programmable lighting to express what's going on in their community, in the nation, whether it's sports, politics. There's always something going on this particular structure. And so it's a very dynamic project in a urban environment. So that mix works quite well. This is the Hastings Bridge, which is 30 minutes outside of Minneapolis, in a river town, very rural environment. It's a very small town, one main street sort of location on the river. Interestingly, they have always had a bridge here that they have felt was tied to their sense of place as a community. And you can get postcards there of the bridges they had 100 years ago and what they see around themselves on that structure. This bridge, again, is an arch bridge, but they didn't want color. in our conversations with their stakeholder groups, they felt that really they wanted to have a nice element on their river, on their nighttime skyline, but they weren't a dynamic location. And I think that was appropriate. They're a really beautiful river town. It's not about movement. It's not about Las Vegas. It's about just a stroke of light outlining the structure itself, some light on the cable array, so that you acknowledge the bridge at night, and it's a lovely thing to look at. One of the things we try to educate people about is if you don't like the structure, at night you still know it's there. It's still a presence in the environment. So we want to make sure that people realize the choices they're making that way. Then this is the third basket handle. This one's in Edmonton in Alberta. This one does both. So this is on the edge of a city over a river. It does change color, but most of the time the city chooses to leave it as white. So they reserve the color for special occasions, particular sporting events. So I think I've always found that to be a nice progression of those three particular projects. They're very similar, but they really respond to the context of where you are from that perspective.
Yeah.
And then I'll show you one more that's actually not a bridge. So this is a park in Columbus, Ohio, and we were engaged to develop light, quote unquote, light art concepts for them. And we came up with a series of concepts around this existing amphitheater.
I saw that. I saw
you
that
did?
project. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So we spent a lot of time there talking again to the stakeholders and understanding sort of where they were coming from. They had just completed a major renovation of this park. They actually did some things to redirect their adjacent rivers. There's a lot going on here, and they felt very proud of it. And so what they selected from us was the concept of using the steps themselves, the amphitheater steps, as a canvas. And so we actually have lights embedded along the bottom of each step that graze the vertical surface of that step. And it becomes a screen basically at night. We can play video against this. We can obviously do static against it. And so again, it's a very active element for this community, and it reflects their holidays and the festivals they have here. But it's very unique to them, and something that they had in terms of the infrastructure of it. They owned it already. We had just had to come in and activate it.
Yeah, that's great. That is really beautiful.
So
I
think
didn't see it with a lit up that way. So.
Is that a good start for now?
That's a good start.
Good.
Brett?
Sure. Let's see. I think maybe since we've got a big audience in Miami, maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of the behind the scenes sort of thought process for the Royal Caribbean Terminal. You know, I mentioned the idea of kind of coming up with a concept, and we were actually pretty lucky on this one when we went to our first meeting and we started having discussions with the design team about, you know, why did they choose the shape and the architecture of these two buildings. And what came out was that it was the idea that these two buildings, the terminal as well as the parking structure that's directly behind, were really meant to be like two ships passing in the night, which was, you know, a great image to come up with architecture, but it was also perfect for the design of the lighting. Our prime audience are the folks traveling across Biscayne Bay and MacArthur Causeway. And so this is their prime view about 700 feet away. And so that transferred into all of the decision-making that we made. So if you drive by the terminal at night, you will always see a sequence of lighting paintings that have a high amount of contrast between the two buildings. So they're very distinctive and very easily separated visually. And basically what we came up with was every hour, there are approximately 14 different light paintings that slowly morph from one to the other, treatment by treatment. And so as a citizen or a visitor of Miami, you get to experience this concept translated into light. Of course, the owners also, because they are excited about the ability to change the building's color, they also wanted to have some special events. And so here's just a quick screenshot of our control system. And so we made a series of additional light paintings that you'll notice that we actually gave them a title. So this is One Green Light. And we tend to do this on all of our projects because one of the challenges with LED color changing light these days is that it's actually made it so easy to simply just pick a color, make the building red, make it blue. And that's how a lot of our clients initially sort of think about the lighting on the outside of their buildings. And what we try to do is get them to step back and say, this is really a chance to create a beautiful composition on the outside of the building of light and architecture. And so by giving each one of these light paintings a name, whether it's One Green Light or Stars and Stripes for patriotic or Carnival, it sort of elevates the thinking and the feeling about what was created. And then they get excited about it. And then they call us up and they come up with new ideas and they want us to come down and create more light paintings for them as opposed to just walking over to the computer and picking a particular color. So it's sort of a fun example of how to use light and a concept and have it ripple all the way through all the design choices.
I have to say that and I've mentioned this before, that I'm lucky because I can see the building from my pool deck. So I've been able to experience, not just driving by for a few seconds on the causeway, which I do regularly, but, seeing them morph and change a little bit. It's really beautiful. So, Erwin.
Yes, let me just, all right. So I just show a couple of slides from recent projects. That was a very prominent one. That was 2017 at Madison Square Park in New York, which has a wonderful public art program. And those are temporary projects. Or this project is temporary. It was for a half year, the winter season of 2017, 2018. It went through a very long, proposal process, and then we, exploded the budget and had to scale everything down. But yeah, we basically lit the center oval lawn of the park with custom fixtures that I built in my studio. So I have to mention that I'm quote unquote an artist. I don't even consider myself a designer, I think. And so I have a lot of hands-on experience because I grew up as a furniture maker, actually, and went to a polytechnical high school. So I have a good understanding of bottom-up building and engineering. And there are just a couple of images from here.
Okay, but we're not, do you have it up there? Because we're not seeing it.
Okay, okay, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Then I'm just talking without any visual reference. I apologize.
There you go.
Okay, so just try to refresh your memory what I said. So 2017 and 2018 in the winter, Madison Square Park in New York. And so a couple of more images from that project. And, the above was very fortunate. They were very helpful because they dumped a foot of snow like at the 3rd and 4th of January of 2018. And it just stopped snowing when the snow was touching the fixtures. So we got really, really lucky.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But yeah, just mentioning, so a lot of the engineering and the actual building was done in my studio. And here's actually a project that we just got through a competition that's for the Convention Center Park, what's it called? Ernest Morial New Orleans Convention Center Park in front of the Convention Center in New Orleans. And those are two C-shaped light benches that face each other as a quiet space among that quite noisy park. And then those individual panels are programmable. And all of this also will be basically manufactured in my shop. And here is a predecessor of those panels from 2010 at the Beach Museum in Manhattan, Kansas. This was a temporary project. And then here also, it's not a giant structure, it's a very, very humble structure. I was part of a very big project that I did for the city of Spartanburg in 2016, which is supported by the Bloomberg Philanthropies Public Art Challenge Grant. It's just one of 9 projects actually. And here I set myself the goal not to have any preconceptions of what I'm doing. It was basically a lot of listening tours through the city, talking to different neighborhoods. And they just said, we want to do something in that park. So I basically illuminated that picnic shelter and had, helpers from the community to basically build the lighting structure. And then I gave a workshop and taught them, to use that, free software, how to program it. So they have a Wi-Fi password where they can log in and program that. It's a very humble structure. So it's like, it's not not what happened in Miami.
But the lighting elevates it.
But the idea was, to create an artwork of mine, but at special occasions, hand over the key to the community. So if they have a cookout or, they have a choir practice sometimes in that park, they can make their own light show. And that was a very good crossover between being, an artist with my own, let's call it signature work, and just as a utilitarian infrastructure for the community.
That's really,
I have more slides, but I think we should just leave it at that so other people can show things.
Okay. Well, we can continue the discussion, and if we have time, we'll look at some more projects. And you can unshare that now. Also, before I forget, I want to remind any of the architects that are on that we do have one HSW AIA credit, but you need to let us know and send in your AIA member number or your registration number in order to get that credit. It won't be given automatically. So one of the, thinking about this and looking at these projects, and this is one of the discussions that we had with earlier, is how does lighting affect the environment? And what kind of mitigation, what kind of issues come up, and what kind of mitigation do you develop as it comes to the different projects and their locations? Ken, you want to start with that?
Sure. That's actually a big part of our work on these bridge structures in particular. We have to be aware of environmental concerns such as migratory birds, turtles, other endangered species, and understand and work with the local wildlife officials in terms of what are they sensitive to, what are they going to respond to that we need to be cautious about. And that might be color, movement. That could be if there's cloud cover on a particular day, that's going to make a bridge glow in the clouds, right? Which can disorient the birds, lowering the light levels or turning the light levels off for it. We do create content so that as Brett was talking about before, the show that runs on the bridge, we will create content that omits particular colors, depending on what animals we're trying to respond to from that perspective. Then there's also light pollution issues. And we do pay a lot of attention to where our light is going and where it shouldn't go. We do calculations of the sky glow to make sure we're not contributing to the sky glow around the structure in unnecessary ways, to make sure that we're good neighbors in terms of how we're participating in the environment. So it's different at every site because every site has its own needs, but it is something that comes up on most projects.
Yeah, Brett, is that part of your research that you do when you're developing the design for a project?
It is. It's something we tackle on every project. Just like Ken mentions, we think about not only the wildlife, but also the impact of light pollution on what we're doing. And we have to be cognizant of the context of where our project is. There are certain cities, New York City, Times Square, there's an abundance of light. And then there are other, we've done projects in places like Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a much quieter, visually quieter city at night. And, we have to make choices that respect where our projects are. But even beyond just general light pollution and wildlife, we have to be, as Ken said before, good neighbors. I've actually got to, let's see if I can share my screen. I've got another project that we did. If you guys can see my screen. So this is a project we did actually in New York City. This was called 1717 Broadway. It's just north of Times Square. And when it was built, it was the tallest hotel in New York City. Actually, it was the tallest hotel in the Western Hemisphere. And so we did this design at the top of the sort of the crown of the building. And one of the first things we did after coming up with the initial design and getting approved by the owner was starting to think about, well, we have neighbors around us. You know, we actually had a condo building a block and a half away that was going to have condo units looking right at the top of this building. So we just took a proactive approach and we reached out to them and started a conversation about what we were doing. And also we sort of came up with a method of working with them so that when we did do the installation, we invited them to come see what we were doing. We gave them the presentation. And then in the end, we actually did adjust light levels on the building to make sure that we weren't intruding into those homes. So I think, you know, we have a responsibility as lighting designers to look at all aspects of the people around the places that we design.
Absolutely. You know, one of the discussion points with that Erwin that you suggested is so why don't we appreciate the dark anymore? So yeah. I thought that was an interesting comment from a lighting artist.
In the pre-discussion phase, you know, like I assumed the role of the devil's advocate, of course, you know, just one role to be in. It's just because it's, of course, the night is beautiful and dark is beautiful, and that's why we, you know, very often try to escape the city and go into the countryside because it's not lit at night. And you know, like right now I'm in Tampa. We just installed a project, and I can actually show some images because it goes to the earlier discussion. I have to go to the construction site very early in the morning when it's still dark, you know, and so I walk through the street and there's this glaring light of a building that is illuminated. And I'm like, why do I have to stare on my way to work at this glaring light? You know? It's just a very simple question. And that was a light designer who had obviously his or her best intentions to make a statement, but it's like, why do I have to be
subject?
You know, like let's like interrogation room light, you know? Everything else besides, obviously, we just have to see like what is necessary and what is not. You know, it's the same, you know, with our acoustic environment. Why do we have to have music? It's the same question. Why do I need music in an elevator? It's a really basic question for me, and it goes okay. Like I'm meandering over the cliff now. It's like, why do we have to have food everywhere? You know, like, why do we have to snack all the time? I mean, there's just those things, you know, like don't eat more than 3 meals a day. Of course, it's nice to have a snack in between, maybe. But it's this whole thing, just because we can eat all the time. I don't think we should eat all the time. You know? Just
because we can doesn't mean we should.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same as with light. Just we can light everything doesn't mean we have to light everything. Just because you have a loudspeaker in every square inch of an apartment building right now, it doesn't mean we have to listen to like elevator music all the time. You know, it just and I love music, but I keep my music consumption very, very limited actually, because for me it's a special moment where I concentrate on listening to music instead of when I do cat drawings I also listen to music a lot. But it's just this, I think we have to be very careful with this because our senses and also our you know, perceptual system in the brain, I don't think we are made to digest that much information, visual, auditory, and taste-wise. Okay,
you know,
going back
to Ken's point earlier, you know, I think we have an obligation as lighting designers to educate our clients as well as the public. If I can share. I've got so I mentioned Charlotte, North Carolina before. So one of the projects we did down there was work on the Bank of America Stadium for the Carolina Panthers. And we went down there and we were hired as the exterior lighting designers. And you know, I mentioned the idea of doing mock-ups previously. So here's a photo of a really large scale exterior mock-up of the lighting of the bowl of the stadium. And this was originally conceptualized as lighting that was going to be used on game days, maybe game weekends if they were in the playoffs. But generally, the lighting was going to be off from a cost perspective, and also just from a light pollution perspective. And we did this mock-up, and I was in the car driving around with Mr. Richardson, the owner of the Panthers, and driving around town. And he got so excited about the lighting. He's like, I want to leave the lighting on all night long, and I want to have it on every night. And
Oh my gosh.
we had to talk with him about, so why do you want to do that? And, you know, again, sort of getting back to what are the owner's goals? What are they trying to do? And he said, when people fly into Charlotte, I want them to see the stadium. And so, you know, we went away, we had another mock-up night scheduled the next night. And in the next morning, we started thinking about what he wanted to achieve. And so this is a photograph of the inside of the stadium, and which is actually far more visible from a plane. And we had, luckily, the team colors were all, you know, this blue was in all the seats. So I had the crew that night grab some of the fixtures off of the outside mock-up and install them on the light towers over the stadium. So with these 8 fixtures, we were able to light up half the stadium. So instead of, you know, having thousands of watts of power to light up the whole stadium, we can take a very small amount of fixtures and have a huge amount of impact. So we brought Mr. Richardson in the next night and showed him this. And he's like, okay, great. So we won't turn on the lights on the outside. We won't cause all that light pollution and burn all that power, but we can still achieve what he was trying to do with a smarter approach. So you know, as lighting designers, I think we have to think like that, and we have to take the time to kind of educate our client of what the other options are.
Well, I think that's what architects say all the time, is that you have to find a way to educate the client so that they understand, you know, what you're trying to do and what might be the best way to do something. And
if I may go back just to this question about
sure.
and also because a lot of people are concerned because now, you know, it's all programmable lighting and there's always a movement involved. And since we are very often with bridges or right now a tunnel involved in like traffic situations, we always have to test patterns and basically tell them, is this speed appropriate? You know, because I always try to get a clause in there. If there's a traffic, in my contracts, if there's a traffic accident, it's not my fault, you know, because we're a very litigious society.
oh my gosh, yeah.
You know, it's the light designer's or artist's fault that somebody ran a red light, you know. And I just grab the screen for one more time, if you may. So I'm just showing images from the tunnel from the last 2 nights. So those are just were shot the last couple of nights in the tunnel. Those are like 31 light discs that are all programmable. And yeah, so they're basically light patterns running around. So that's a different one. And this, so you can program the inside and the outside of that circle. And then now over the whole tunnel, you could of course interfere with the traffic. So right now, the last 2 nights, I just had a pattern running that runs along the trajectory of the tunnel and asked the DOT people, Department of Transportation people, is this appropriate? And they said, yes, this is fine. So I think this is just an example of you have a test phase where the client
testing to see
tells this is fine and what this will be too fast, for example, or too many color changes.
That's great. That's beautiful. That would be a cool thing to see in a tunnel. I'm going to take a minute and go to the chat and look at some of the questions from our participants in the program. And one of the questions is on the 1717 project, were the fixtures or nodes individually programmable, or to create or was it one linear component?
No, they were individually controllable. But the interesting thing about that project is we knew when we came up with that design that there would be, from the owner's perspective and maybe from others who would talk to them, that if we allowed the fixture to be a totally controllable, red, blue, green, being able to make any color you want. It basically turns the top of the building into a video screen. And then there would be a push, a desire by people to turn it basically into advertising, that you could monetize that lighting design into something that could be sold. And so we very intentionally only designed and installed blue LEDs. We chose blue as the color, happened to be the owner's favorite color. And we only put blue on there so that he could possibly do that, but chances are most advertising wouldn't want to do that and use that as a screen. So we intentionally kind of limited our owner's ability to turn something into advertising.
So one of the questions, also a question that I had is, and I know, Ken, we discussed this in length, it's not just figuring out the context in terms of design, but the community. So it's not just the client that you're designing for, it's the community. And how much do you engage the community in the early phases of your designs?
We try to quite a bit. So from where I sit, at least, I try to think about context, not just as the physical or environmental context that we're working in, but also there's a cultural context of how the people in a particular location see themselves and what's important to that community. There's a political context in terms of understanding what are the politics, because a lot of my work is civic, big, large civic structures. So what's the politics going on in this place? Is the city supportive? Is the city council supportive? What is their role in that? We're doing a bridge right now that's got a very strong historic meaning to it. It's metaphorical. So we have to really take into account the people who are tied to that structure emotionally because of the history that took place at that structure. So we need to make sure we understand all those stuff. So context, for us at least, is a very broad, multi-topic term. And if we're doing our job right, we'll reflect those different components and respect those different components. And we want the community to have ownership of this. So we want them to be heard. We try very hard not to sort of fly in and say, here we are, we're going to light your structure. We want to hear what they see about themselves and then make sure that we're reflecting that back. That's a very important dynamic. And that way, you know, if you're on one of the stakeholder groups on one of our projects and you're raising concerns and you're raising design ideas, if we can integrate that and we can pick up on that for you, you'll have some ownership of that when it's completed. And that's important.
It's true. So Brett, in terms of that, have you ever had a situation where a client wants one thing, but the community says, no? Well,
we've definitely, because most of our projects are commercial projects. So we're working with an owner as opposed to a lot of civic projects that Ken works on. So we have those sort of competing desires. And you know that we do occasionally get pushback where an owner really is, you know, we could have seen a much different reaction to our neighbors around 1717 than we did. But luckily, you know, we've gotten pretty good at being able to engage, as Ken said, the rest of the community. And, you know, we have a pretty good sense of what is going to be controversial and what's not. And we try to get ahead of it. So we try to avoid that as much as possible, but it does happen.
So, Erwin, yeah, I'm going to ask you to, well, do you want to address this question? Because actually I was going to ask you to be devil's advocate again for one of the.
What kind of panel do you want?
You know, your idea of Disneyfication of commercial lighting, and you know, why do we have to have all of that? You know,
well, you know, like I spent half of the year basically in my production shop in Ohio. It's a big facility because I can't afford that in New York, and so you know, so there's mostly single family houses or two family houses, and they're lit to the hilts, obviously, during Halloween and Christmas, you know, and and some of them very nice, some of them, you know, beyond atrocious. And because you realize, you know, there's a big Walmart, you know, just because it's the biggest, you know, shopping opportunity here. And then they're like the blow up Santas, you know, that glow, and they deflate because the ventilation system doesn't work, or they explode. So it's like there's this, that's why I brought up this idea with snack and food and you know, or music. It's just because you have a boombox, it would be horrible if everybody runs around in New York City with like boombox. There would be a nice performance piece by, you know, like a contemporary Charles Ives or something. If you're like, you know, 500 people with different boomboxes, you know, being choreographed through Central Park. But and so in that is the question as an artist / designer. Is there anything we can do about it, or should we? That was just basically my question that I submitted. Is there,
Right, should we?
do we have a role? Because we don't do, or I don't do Halloween lighting or Christmas lighting, you know. But you know, Ken or Brett might do something in that respect.
And that's where I think that's where our role as educators come in again, because it really, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the use of color in this way wasn't possible. The technology didn't exist. And so once we cross that threshold where it's not easy, but it's doable to do these color changing installations, you do have to spend time with either your client or the community and have them understand it's not always appropriate. It's not always the right thing. Or as Brett was saying, it's not always the right thing every night, right? Perhaps 360 days a year, that structure is white at night or very dim at night. And there are 5 days a year where it's special and it does something nice and it's a treat. It's something that people then, I'm going to be down at the building when they do the countdown for New Year's, and it's a gathering point. It's that type of thing. So it's up to us as designers and the experts in this realm to really spend some time with folks and give them some boundaries and let them understand that if you get too carried away, you're actually going to negate what you're trying to do. You're going to create a negative in the community.
I think it's also very because light in that respect is such a young medium. I always use music metaphors. You know, just because we have like a big band doesn't mean all saxophones have and all brass and all drums have to like play at the same time all the time. Sometimes you have a saxophone solo and then there's just a quiet piano solo. And if the brass, you know, kills the piano solo, the composition is dead. So
I'm going to steal that. That's good.
Yeah. So I always use music metaphors because we have more a central reaction to them because we don't have a light vocabulary. Well, not yet.
The upside of this, though, the fact that anyone can go onto Amazon and buy color-changing light fixtures and put them in their living room or outside, yes, you do get sort of an overuse of that. But the upside is now the public is thinking about light in a way they didn't think about light 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so now that it's a little bit easier to have a dialogue because we've all, people start to see their neighbors do bad lighting designs. And then, so there's education that Ken was talking about starts to happen on its own. And there's just a much greater appreciation for what we all do when they try to do it themselves. So it's a double-edged sword, but there's pluses and minuses.
It's kind of like, I don't know what I like, but I know I don't like that.
Yep.
So we only have actually 4 minutes left, and I wanted to give each of you a minute to give us some final thoughts before we close the program. You want to start, Erwin?
Well, I'm an abstract artist, and light in itself is most an abstract medium. So I sometimes try to give just pieces meaning by using a title. So the piece, for example, in Tampa is called Circles Unity, and I meant this to the American people in an emotional way, in a way, because we need more unity, and that's why I chose that title.
That's great. Ken?
Closing thought. I think overall, you know, just speaking to your audience base and your client base, I think, you know, as you explore your projects and you think about how you want to have an impact on the nighttime environment, to reach out to a professional who could guide you as early as you can, because it should be a collaboration. It should be something that's hand in hand with the development of the architecture. And both components will be more successful if the conversation starts early.
Great, thanks. Brett?
Yeah, and furthering what Ken said, you know, when an architect brings on a lighting designer, really engage with them on the conversation about why you've designed the building the way you've designed it, and really try to get on the same page with not just your lighting designer, but everyone else on the team of what is the goal and what is the concept that's going to drive you there. And if you can get to that sort of commonality with your design approach, then all the decisions that come down the road and all the tough choices that you have to make can all look back at that concept. It'll help guide you and make all of that work a lot easier and frankly more successful in the end.
I want to thank you, Brett. I want to also, before we close, give a shout out to Miami-Dade County's Art and Public Places program. For those of you that don't know, 1.5% of a construction cost goes into public art on county buildings or buildings where that's on county land. And we're very lucky in this county. We have one of the largest collections of public art in the country, and some fabulous projects like the one that you see there behind Brett. And we're able to work with amazing artists like Erwin and great lighting designers and other artists, and so it's a fabulous program that we have here. I want to thank the three of you for joining us today. It was really a great program, and I can tell you we did not have anybody drop off. So that's how fascinating the three of you were. So thank you all. Look forward to maybe continuing the discussion sometimes in the future, talking about other projects. And I know Jason, I don't know if you have a couple of things you want to say before we close.
No, I mean, I just put in the chat what a great panel. I mean, I know each of you could capture our interest for an hour individually. So I think we should just stay in touch, because I think there's a lot of great follow-up here. Always been a big fan of the power of the power of light, actually. I think you guys all stated it very succinctly, the importance of lighting. And, I do. All the colored lighting is a little scary sometimes in certain places, like I agree there. So I think it all starts with good architecture, right? So that's what I like to think. So thank you so much, guys. Great. Really, really interesting. Amazing.
Thank you for including us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We will have this, the recording from this on our website by the beginning of the week. For any of you that want to go back to it. Don't forget, Colleen's been putting in the chat about your AIA number, but please don't forget, because I know several of you are architects, and you can all, even though it's early in the, you just did your final credit run, but please let us know so we can give you your credit. Again, thank you, Erwin, Ken, and Brett. It was fantastic. And we'll talk again someday soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, gentlemen. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Colleen.